Hi, everyone. I'm Gretchen Bailey with Optometry Times, and today I have the pleasure of being joined by Bernard Gilly, who is CEO of GenSight Biologics, and that's a company based in France that just had a new product come out. So, Bernard, thank you very much for talking with me today. I really appreciate you taking the time.
Thank you very much. Hello, everybody.
So why don't you tell me, first of all, a little bit about the company and what you aim to do before we jump into talking about Lumevoq, which is your new product.
Yeah, of course. It was great pleasure. GenSight is actually a company that I have co-founded back in 2012 with Professor José Sahel, who is a clinician and a scientist specialized in retinal diseases in France. And the idea at that time was to try to develop new approaches towards blinding diseases. And in fact, in our eye, we have sort of two sorts of diseases. One are genetic disorders that are linked to very different mutations in genes, and that could affect either the photoreceptor, which are those neurons that transform light into an electric signal, or the retinal ganglion cell, which is another type of neurons in our retina, the role of which is to send information to the brain. And so that was, and then the other blinding disorders that are really much better known are the macular degeneration, which in fact is not a genetic disorder, but it's the disease of aging, of an abnormal aging. And that also leads to blindness, although later in age, after 70 or 75 years of age. So the idea at this very beginning was to address this type of disease. And we had two technologies. One is called mitochondrial targeting sequence, MTS. And that allows to address a defect which is not in the nucleus of the cells, but in the mitochondrion. And mitochondrion are, in fact, the powerhouse of the cells. The cells need the mitochondrion to get enough energy. So if the mitochondrion is not functional, then you cannot have enough energy for your neurons, and the neurons will stop functioning and ultimately will even degenerate. And that's the topic of our first product, Lumevoq, which is addressing a terrible disease called Leber hereditary optic neuropathy. I mean, it's terrible not only because it's blinding, but also because it affects young adults, starts an average between 15 and 30, 35 years of age. So people that are really having normal vision like you and me, and very suddenly will start noticing that they lose sight from one eye. And then very, very rapidly, it's really very brutal. It's a matter of a few days to a few weeks. They will lose sight into the first eye and secondary into the second eye. And
in a few days to a few weeks, that is a very rapid onset.
It is very rapid. In fact, 1 year after the onset, almost 95% of the patients are legally blind.
Those aren't good statistics.
Exactly. And so that was really the core of our decision with Professor Sahel to try to address this disease. So we developed our technology, which is in fact a gene therapy. So we inject, in fact, inside the eye. It's quite easy. It's not a surgery. It's just like the administration of the anti-VEGF in macular degeneration. So it's just a simple intravitreal injection. Then we have a vector that gives the missing gene into the retinal ganglion cells, which are those cells that are degenerating in LHON. And then the protein is expressed, and we demonstrate that we restore the mitochondrial machinery. And by the fact, the results of the first two phase 3 trials demonstrate that, one, we can increase visual acuity in those patients who are fully blind by more than 5 lines. More than 5 lines would mean that, first, all those who were off chart, who were unable to read the large letters on the chart, they would be able, after being treated, to read those letters or even smaller letters, 5 lines below the largest letter. Second, we demonstrate that this is durable. We have one administration, and now in last June, we released data demonstrating that the improvement of visual acuity is maintained for 3 years after one treatment.
3 years after one treatment.
Absolutely. And we even have data on several patients, not all of the patients because we need to follow up on them, but we have data that demonstrate that at 4 years and even 5 years, we have the maintenance of this effect. Third, it is really well tolerated. Here we have a gene therapy approach that does not create any issue, that is very well tolerated. We can see some mild inflammatory response after the injection, nothing really serious, always reversible, and in the long term, we don't see any effect. So very, very, very well tolerated. And finally, this improvement of visual acuity, and that was demonstrated through a questionnaire that we have addressed to the patients, that we achieve a clinically meaningful improvement of the quality of life of those patients. And if you can have an access to our website, it's very easy. There is a replay of a KOL event we had in last June, where one of our key opinion leader, Professor Sean Donahue from Vanderbilt University, has shown the effect on 2 of his patients who were injected in the 2 eyes. And as you will see, this is really spectacular. One can even play balls after having been blind.
Wow, what a difference. And as you said, quality of life for these patients. Now, you said that the effect of a single treatment lasts for several years. Have you tested subsequent treatments then on these patients to see if they are able to continue maintaining that visual acuity?
No, we have not, because part of the clinical trial were to demonstrate that we can correct the defect and improve the visual acuity. At this moment, we don't see or we don't foresee that we will need any re-injection, although that can be done, but we would reserve this for the post-marketing studies if we can eventually mount some additional trials to understand whether if we inject once and then re-inject 2 years after or 3 years after, whether it can do better. But that will be for post-marketing trials. We really want to push the treatment as soon as possible to the patients. And get
of course, of course. What other options do patients with this condition have?
They have none. They have none. Basically, at this moment, there is no treatment. There is one medicine that has been approved in Europe, but it's not been approved in the US. It's called idebenone. It's a molecule which, by the way, is available on the web. And so many patients are taking this medicine, but with very, very limited results. So we don't even ask patients to withdraw from taking some idebenone if they want, but because the effect is very, very limited.
So it sounds like this is a breakthrough for these patients in order to improve quality of life and really give them their lives back if they've lost their vision.
Absolutely, it's clearly very, very important, and we have been able to also show a comparison between what's happening in our treated patients in the clinical trial and the natural history, what's happening in patients who have not been treated. And patients that have not been treated lose their sight, and they don't move from being legally blind. They even have some further deterioration of their visual acuity as time passes. After 3 and 4 years, they even go lower. And if you compare with our treated patient, that's really striking.
So I understand that you have applied for approval in Europe, and what is your status in the United States?
Yeah, so we filed for approval last September to the European agency. It's a very well documented process, and so we were able to achieve and to announce 2 weeks ago, in early November, that the file has been validated by the European authority, and so now they are going to process further, and we expect the authorization to be given by the last quarter of next year, and then we will commercialize the product in Europe. In the US, we had discussion with the FDA, of course, and the FDA has asked us to perform an additional trial, which is called Reflect, which is under a special protocol assessment. This trial is fully recruited since July 19, and the FDA endorsed agree on the follow-up at 18 months after the treatment. And that will be May of next year. So May of next year, we will announce the result of REFLECT. That will open up the road to filing a BLA, probably the end of the third quarter or beginning of the fourth quarter of next year. And then the process will be the classical FDA process.
Right. So we likely will be talking again.
Yeah, absolutely, sure. In the meantime, I must say that we've been lucky enough to have expanded access INDs in the US. So a number of patients have requested to get the treatment through their doctors. So that has been processed by the FDA. We have already treated 4 of these patients. Additional demand, I think, if I'm correct, for 6 of these patients that are being processed by the FDA. Similarly, in Europe, we have a process called ATU, that stands for Temporary Authorization of Use, where patients are also able to request the treatment through their doctors. And we have now treated more than 12 of these patients since earlier this year. And part of the year has been, in fact, closed down because of this
Yes,
COVID
of course.
crisis. So we could have done more, but that's at least the number of patients that have been treated.
This is all very exciting news, and there'll be more to come. And I also understand that you are looking at other treatments for other conditions as well. Are you able to comment on those?
Yeah, sure. We have a second product, which is now undergoing a phase 1/2 trial. So this is the first trial. And this product is very different. So let me try to explain here. We're changing gears. We are really talking about these blinding disease that are linked to degeneration of these neurons that are called the photoreceptors, those who are responsible for the first step of vision. So when these neurons degenerate, then sooner or later the patient will turn blind, because the first step of vision cannot happen. And again, there are many conditions, either genetic or aging disease like macular degeneration that leads to photoreceptor degeneration. And in fact, once the photoreceptor have degenerated, the rest of the retina, strangely enough, remains alive and functional. Only the first step of vision cannot happen. So we decided to try to transfer the photoreceptor function into another cell type in the retina that remains alive. And we decided to go for these retinal ganglion cells that are in fact already sending the signal to the brain. So we ask them to, in fact, do the 2 functions. One, transforming the light into an electric signal, and second, do what they used to do, transfer the signal to the brain. And so for this, we use a gene therapy. We use a gene that encodes for a protein that is sensitive to light, which in fact comes from the MIT in Boston, and it's from the laboratory of Ed Boyden. And when this protein is expressed, we have a pair of goggles that in fact just transform the outside visual information, what we see normally, into the very same information, pixel by pixel, but it's mediated by red light. Because this protein is very sensitive to red light, and red light is very safe for the retina. And that really works very well. I mean, I cannot show you how it works in different animal models, but we know it works in rats. We know it works in non-human primates. So we now in patients. This is the first trial that started by the end of we are 20, by mid 19. It went very well. There was a delay because of the COVID crisis earlier this year, but we have now completed the 9 first patients, and because it's really striking results, we in fact have reserved the first findings to a peer-reviewed scientific paper. We submitted this paper, so I expect this to be published before the end of the year. But we are continuing. We'll announce the full results of this trial after 1 year of follow-up of this patient, and that is going to be probably by Q3 of next year.
That sounds very exciting. You have been very hard at work, and you're looking at these conditions that are causing loss of vision in patients, and I think that's just incredible. Now, you said earlier that you founded this company. May I ask what led you down this road?
Well, in fact, I'm a scientist by training, but that was quite long ago. And then I spent all my career in creating and developing a biotechnology company. I was one of the first pioneers in gene therapy in Europe. And then I spent a little bit of time into an investment fund, and then start again creating company with a vested interest into neurosciences, into neurodegenerations, and retina is part of the brain. And so I figure out that it would be easy to get some proof of concept into the retina, that we can transfer gene, that works well, and then eventually later on move to other neurodegenerative diseases like ALS or the Charcot disease or Parkinson or others. Because the eye is a closed system.
Mm-hmm.
So if you inject into the eye, I mean, there's nothing that sheds away from the eye. And we are dealing with a relatively small number of cells. It's really striking, but we have billions and billions of neurons in our brain, but in the retina, our vision is in fact linked to about 100 million photoreceptors, which is not a lot, but even less of these ganglion cells. Those cells who are sending the signal to the brain, they are about 1 million. We're all born with 1 million of those cells, and normally we keep those cells for our life. In some cases, like LHON, they degenerate, but normally if they don't, we keep them all our life. So when a gene is inserting into these cells, there's no reason why we will lose the effect for many, many years. And probably, and that's what we are going to demonstrate by following the patient over time, but we're probably going to demonstrate that this is for life.
That's very interesting. That is not the answer that I expected you to give. And it seems like you're using the eye then as almost a microcosm of what can then happen in the brain. And I think that's really, really interesting. I'm glad that you were able to explain all of that. Is there anything else that we should be looking to hear from GenSight Biologics in the future beyond that? Or are we focused right on these two therapies right now?
Well, it's clearly for the moment we're focusing on these two therapies. It's a question, I mean, as you say, I mean, the eye is a model, but also behind this model, we have patients that are expecting to the treatment. So we are really focusing on this heavily, and because we have limited resource, we need to focus on this. But evidently, as time goes, as we'll get eventually more resources, we will go to other these blinding diseases, and there are quite many of those, and particularly other mitochondrial disease of the eye. But we are also in the future will contemplate moving into the brain, into trying to treat other neurodegenerative diseases.
Absolutely. Well, thank you very much for your insights and for your time today. I'm sure that we will be talking again because you will have more news to share, and I really appreciate your time, Bernard. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Gichen. See you soon.